Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast, where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Baltazar.
And at this point, it just feels like mercy that the regular season is over, because K-State lost the last game of the year up against Iowa State, giving Iowa State their first 10-win season and a berth to Arlington for the Big 12 championship. So, that hurts. That sucks quite a bit. But, this is one of the rare games that I just straight up didn't have hope in, basically from the word go, because the very first snap of the game was a fumble on a triple option, which I felt like was cosmic punishment for me saying that triple option was the correct game plan, because some deity in this universe enjoys pointing at me in particular and laughing at me. But this was just a miserable game, and we're going to blend this recap with the season recap. We will do like a full season recap whenever the bowl game is over, unless it is the Liberty Bowl that we get sent to, in which case we're never talking about this football season again. But there are going to be more brief thoughts here. But Connor, you had a little bit of mercy thrown your way when it comes to this game.
Yeah, I was at a wedding, so I wasn't able to really watch much consistently or with much focus until the second half, really. So that marks the second away game in the month of November that ended in disaster for K-State that I was able to mostly or entirely not watch. So maybe it's the universe just like giving me an opportunity to escape these things. But first was Houston. I did not see any of that game. And then this one, which I was able to watch the second half. But, man, talk about a disappointing end to the season.
Yeah, and I think the most frustrating part about this is that the game on the scoreboard was close, basically the duration of the game. And yet there was at no point where I felt like K-State was going to win. I was just sort of sitting there staring at the TV like, all right, cool. Like what's going to happen next? And a lot of things happened. And a lot of them were, it was sort of similar to the BYU game where it was a lot of 1 in a million strange happenings. The problem is that those 1 in a million strange happenings have become more and more common, which genuinely makes me believe it is a coaching issue, which, believe me, we will get to the coaching issue, because there really is the one big coaching issue. But I guess we'll start with the positives. That's the defense did their part in this game. It said, Iowa State put up 29 points. You look at that, it's like, oh, the defense must not have played that well. The defense was getting handed piss poor field position the entire night. I think every single scoring drive that Iowa State had started within the K-State 40-yard line. And there's very little that you as a defense can do when that happens. And then you look at the more individual stats. Rocco Becht nearly had a sub 33% completion percentage. Granted, he didn't throw any picks, but he should have thrown like 6 or 7 of them. And we contained their receiving game. We contained Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel very, very well. They rushed the ball a little better against us than we thought they would. But, again, the scoring is what matters. And Iowa State only scored because they kept getting advantageous field position for one reason or another, which we'll talk about in a second. But I do want to give the defense their flowers, because damn if they didn't earn it.
Yeah, the defense really did play pretty well for the most part. There weren't a ton of successful sustained drives for Iowa State. And like you said, their first scoring drive, they started on K-State's 27-yard line, got a touchdown out of that. They added a field goal at the end of the first quarter, or it was early in the second, where they started just around midfield. They did take a couple of touchdown drives, or one touchdown drive from their own 22, but they also had another touchdown drive where they started K-State's 30. So their first 2 touchdown drives were from the K-State 30-yard line or closer. And both of those were acquired via K-State fumbles. And then they did not score a touchdown in the second half. So that's also really pretty impressive stuff. K-State's second half defense has actually been really good these last 3 weeks, and keeping teams off the scoreboard. Just the field goal and safety, I think, was it in the second half for Iowa State.
Yep.
Which the safety is certainly not the defense's fault. It is perhaps the furthest you can get from it being the defense's fault. But no, this K-State defense really did about everything they could do. I think in this game, particularly in the second half, with only one drive ending up in points for Iowa State, even their missed field goal, that was a turnover on downs that they got at K-State's 35. And we were able to let probably too much time go off the clock, but still hold them. But still, I mean, there was truly only one sustained, successful Iowa State drive. And a lot of it just came from one big missed tackle from Jordan Riley, I think, that really kind of blew the drive open and let them score in like a minute. So that was kind of a weird one, even for the defense. But yeah, this is another Joe Klanderman defense that has been really doing absolutely everything it could do. But at the end of the day, it's kind of getting let down by bad field position.
Yeah, and we're not going to do the traditional game day grades, but if we were, the most notable of the grades would definitely belong to the quarterback and the offensive coordinator. Pretty much everyone else actually had a pretty solid game outside of the running backs, which just couldn't get going because of schematic reasons. But I walked away very impressed with the defensive backs, linebackers, defensive line, Klanderman. You know, Keegan Johnson had the one fumble, but I felt like the receivers had a fine day overall. Tight ends had a few drops. Some of them were their fault. Some of them weren't. But the big one comes down to the quarterback and the offensive coordinator, Connor Riley. Let me preface this by basically telling you the entire story of at least me, this, and then Connor, of course, because I almost tell this story every other week. But at this point, I feel like it's important to know where I'm coming from when I say this. And then Connor, you have your own story as well. But I started off as someone who did not like the Connor Riley hire. I was very impressed through the first 6 or 7 games of the season. And then K-State entered their game up against Houston 7-1 on the season. They would then go on to leave. They would go 1-3 during the rest of the game. And during those last 4 games, Connor Riley had exactly one passable, admittedly good performance up against Cincinnati. So I've sort of slingshot back right into the Connor Riley has not been a good hire for the offensive side of the ball. In fact, I would go as far as to say that a substantial amount of Avery Johnson's issues, and don't get me wrong, Avery Johnson hasn't been perfect. He's been very far from it, but he's getting very little in terms of help from his offensive coordinator, which has caused him to borderline not develop since like the second or third game of the season, outside of a few aberrations in West Virginia and Colorado. So that's sort of the TLDR of what's probably going to take up the next 15 minutes. Connor, where did you start and what are your thoughts?
I started somewhat on the opposite end as you. I was willing to give him a chance, and I generally leaned positive because I was mainly interested to see what he could bring to the table. And I was pretty open-minded coming into the season. I thought he had a slow start, but otherwise, through the first 7 games, sans the BYU game, which I think maybe was more outside of his control, honestly, than anything.
Yeah.
But he still definitely had his moments where I thought that maybe a sequencing wasn't great or situational play calling needed work. But overall, I was, even despite being initially optimistic, I was a little pleasantly surprised with how things had gone for the most part, particularly in that middle portion of the season post BYU and pre Houston. I thought that he was really effective. And that West Virginia game, I thought, was actually a really great sign that I thought showed how adaptable and malleable he would be. But after that, the complete and total opposite seemed to really show its head. As the run game coordinator his whole time at K-State, I figured he would be better at adjusting the run game, but that just wasn't really the case except for the Cincinnati game. And maybe that's just indicative of the quality of opponent that we were playing. But yeah, these last few games really kind of led from me being on the a more positive side of the Connor Riley train to really kind of getting off the train completely. I'm really not in the camp of retaining him at this point, which is a far cry from where I was when we first got him.
Yeah, I don't think that if K-State wants to maximize the potential of Avery Johnson, which I'm certain they do, I don't think Connor Riley can remain as the offensive coordinator because the pass game scheming was never really supposed to be his thing. He was always supposed to be more on the run game scheming. And the old adage is a young quarterback's best friend is a tight end and a good running and play action game. Connor Riley was supposed to give them that element of the running game. He has, and I don't say this word lightly, ever since the West Virginia game, he has failed at establishing a good running game. He has downright failed to do so, which when you have DJ Giddens in your backfield, when you have DJ Giddens, Dylan Edwards, and even arguably Joe Jackson, Avery Johnson in your backfield, and you're failing to get a consistent running game, no, you can't stay. You very simply cannot stay, especially when that is supposed to be your calling card. If we were an air raid team, I would be able to excuse that. We're not. We're not an air raid team. And Avery Johnson is not going to be an air raid quarterback. And he can't keep coming out with sub 50% completion percentages because he's pressing and having to basically try to put the offense on his shoulders because he's not getting any help from the play calling. Avery Johnson has not been perfect. Like I said, he's not been perfect this year. He's been a true sophomore quarterback. None of those are going to be perfect unless you're Trevor Lawrence. Or I guess Andrew Luck. And my point is you have to be a unicorn. But the most important thing for any quarterback is to get help from the coaching staff. And Avery Johnson simply has not gotten that from Connor Riley, especially towards the back end of the year. And here's why I'm so concerned by this. Because you're in a bad situation no matter what you do. If you retain Connor Riley, this is why I thought it was a bad idea to begin with. If you retain Connor Riley, you're putting Avery Johnson in an offense that is going to force him to press and try to be the hero, which is not good for a development of a quarterback. But if you get rid of him, you're putting him in a completely new offense, and that'll be essentially his third different offense with a third different play caller in 3 years. Both of those are how you kill a quarterback's development. And I could just be being overly negative because of the loss, and maybe I'll calm down about this in a couple weeks. But right now, my opinion is that Connor Riley has hamstrung the development of Avery Johnson, and Chris Kleiman hiring Connor Riley and allowing it to go on for as long as he does, has the potential to have one of the worst repercussions for an individual K-State player, perhaps since, I don't know, like a massive injury. Who's that tight end that was never, ever healthy? It was like a little bit before my time. Was it Tannehill? Or no, was it? I don't know.
Time frame, like
early 2010s.
early 2010s. I don't know, Andre McDonald, Travis Tannehill.
Travis Tannehill, thank you. But yeah, that's a lot of words that I just said, and I Connor, how do you feel about those words, and what are your own opinions?
Man, I think that we're probably in lockstep on Connor Riley right now, which I like you were definitely, of the two of us, probably the you were definitely the first one when the hire happened to not really be in favor of it, and I was in favor of it. And I was definitely wrong on that front, because this team, despite having an identical regular season record to last year's team, I think was demonstrably worse, which is really a shame. And particularly, you touched on something I was going to touch on, but the probably the biggest disappointment out of everything else that has really kind of gone wrong the latter portions of this season is that we started 7-1 and we were in the driver's seat for Arlington following a gutsy win against Colorado, and then we just completely just disintegrated, and that is kind of inexcusable, honestly. And I was talking about this with you after the game as well, Ace. But from the bits I was able to watch from the game against Iowa State, it left me thinking kind of one word about this team. It's a word I really don't like using because I think it gets thrown around way too much to the point that it loses its meaning. And I also just think people just are pretty inaccurate with assigning it to people. But I think it's honestly, I think we're a little apt for this K-State team, and that word is soft. It's not super tangible. I wish that I had some advanced analytics that break it down. Maybe somebody has a softness rating out there. And it goes beyond, just like big hits or taking big hits. Because if it was big hits, then, like BJ Payne's like the toughest guy out there. He's had some big hits the last few weeks. And there were individual moments where it looked like there was maybe some toughness being shown. But I think particularly on offense, we just looked awkward. We didn't really seem comfortable at any point for the most part. It was just isolated individual moments where things kind of seemed to be better, but for the most part, this team just doesn't really have an edge to it that it seemed that we had back in 21 and 22, and also 2019. But 21-22, those teams, particularly on defense, they really had a really strong identity, and that was kind of molded around being toughness and having an edge about you. But this year, it didn't really seem like we had that for the most part, honestly. And if we did, it was because things were going really well. But if you're going to have that mentality, you have to have it when you're winning or when you're losing, or else it's not that helpful. You're just celebrating or letting yourself go way too down the dumps if you're not playing well and need to get back in it. But man, this is we can do a deeper dissection of the season later, but I think as far as regular seasons go, this is probably one of the most, if not the most, disappointing from K-State in a while. I think it's up there with 2017 is pretty disappointing. But yeah, this regular season last year was really disappointing too. But this year, particularly with a 7-1 start, finishing your last month of the season 1-3 is just bad.
Yeah, and I think if we're going back to this game in particular, I've always said that it's top tier loser behavior to say like, oh, they didn't win this, or like the opponent didn't win this game. We lost this game. No. No, K-State lost this game. And it is, I mean, both teams looked abysmal. The entire game, like they both looked depressingly bad the duration of the game. And that's the worst part, is losing to a team that is bad, but you just lose because you can't get out of your own way. And that is the definition of this game, and arguably the last part of the season, is just K-State was unable to get out of their own way. And it's just really sad. And 9 times out of 10, if it happens once, it's just kind of a bad night. It's a coaching issue at this point. And the strange thing is, I don't know who to pin it on, because I mean, this is the least disciplined and, like you kind of said, softest Chris Kleiman team that we've seen outside of 2020. That year doesn't count, but I don't know. This game in particular filled me with a sense of dread that I think is difficult to truly describe. And it's definitely something that I haven't felt for the duration of the show, for sure. But also a different note on the offensive coordinator, Dylan Edwards only getting three touches this game. One of them was a fumble. One of them was the backwards pitch fumble. So that is, again, coaching malpractice, where Colorado was an air raid team that could not run the football last year. Dylan Edwards was more effective with them because at least the offensive coordinator was using him the first 4 games. But this is one of those games. It's difficult to talk about because there's no real analysis to be done here. Oh, Avery Johnson had a brain aneurysm on the field and ran backwards for his safety. Oh boy, that's weird. That's wacky. Oh, we couldn't run the ball against one of the worst running defenses in the Big 12. That's weird. That's wacky. We had 2 fluky fumbles and a missed field goal on a bad snap. Wow, that's super fun, wacky, and weird. Like, none of those warrant analysis. They're just things that kind of happen. You can't analyze them.
Dylan Edwards, he had the exact same number of total touchdowns this year as he did last year. Colorado, 5. 3 rushing. This year, 3 rushing, 1 receiving, 1 returning. Last year, he had 1 rushing, 4 receiving. He actually had quite a few fewer touches for what it's worth, particularly on offense. Like, he had 20 fewer carries for this K-State team than he did at Colorado. And he had half the catches, less than half the catches, 17 compared to 36 at Colorado. More returns by a lot, but man, we really, I think, underutilized Dylan Edwards, particularly in the receiving game. I think is where I'm most upset about it. Running game, I'm sitting here thinking I really don't think there's much that, based on how we were using DJ and our inability to really get overly creative in the running game this year, I don't know if there's much that we could have used Dylan for in the running game, because if DJ wasn't getting yards going up the middle, Dylan certainly wasn't going to. But receiving-wise, inexcusable, I think, that we did not use Dylan more, with more like complex routes being run in the field. Most of the time we were using him was just in the flats out of the backfield, and I think it really could have. I think we really should have been more proactive in putting him in the slot, or even splitting him out wide, and try to get him in more effective space than just throwing him the flat and calling that space.
Yeah, that's just generally inexcusable. And let's sprinkle in a little bit more positivity here. Jacob Parrish had a hell of a game. Like, Jacob Parrish fought through multiple OPI penalties that simply did not get called, which, granted, K-State was pushing off a little bit too. I will be fair in this one regard, but Jacob Parrish was hanging in there in a way that I didn't really expect, because I know that he's a physical corner, and I know that he has that physicality despite being relatively undersized, but he held his own against a very, very physical receiver in Higgins for Iowa State. So Jacob Parrish would definitely be my pick for defensive MVP. Like I said, pretty much all of the defense, except for two players, I think looked pretty good. And it just so happens that, unfortunately, two of those players play the exact same position. That's Jack safety, and that's Jack Fabris and Jordan Riley. Though, again, flowers and being fair, Jack Fabris did have an amazing pass breakup where he just headbutted someone's hands into forcing a drop. But Jordan Riley has been the biggest disappointment in terms of transfers that we actually expected to do something, probably in the history of the show, outside of Sean Robinson, who didn't play. So
Will Honus, I guess, who also didn't play, was the same class as Sean Robinson.
What a great transfer class that was.
Yeah. I guess maybe you could throw Marenko in as well. Pretty much every linebacker transfer we ever had, actually. So, with the exception of Rex Van Wy, but he's a JUCO guy, and I kind of put them in a different category.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, Jordan Riley had a bad game. Jack Fabris had a really bad game because he doesn't know how to play leverage in coverage yet. And we just kept putting him on the innermost receiver, who was guaranteed to be running an in-breaking route because that is Rocco Becht's game. And Jack Fabris simply declined to play with inside leverage and then got dusted multiple times, which that's a coaching thing. That's a coaching thing. There's really no other reason for it. But linebackers, I felt really had a good game. Despite only getting one sack, I felt like the defensive line had a really, really good game and was getting consistent pressure. I mean, K-State should have walked away with 6 picks that should have been caught. But, I mean, realistically, you know how butterfly wings happen. So, probably 2 or 3 interceptions. It just didn't happen. This just was not K-State's night, in a very similar way to how BYU and Iowa State last year just wasn't K-State's night. And those are the worst kind of games to me. Not where, you get beat because the other team is better, or you get beat just because, you have a bad night. It's against the teams that you should beat, but it seems like they have the rubber banding comeback code embedded into the game, and you very simply are just predetermined to not win the game. Like the user of real life college football set the scheduling sim for Iowa State to win this game. And there was nothing we really could have done about that. Yeah, there's nothing really else to add about this game. So this is going to be a shorter recap, but there's nothing really to recap schematically. Defense had a really good game. Offense didn't. Most of it comes down to play calling. And even where there were a few good play calls, they were overdone by some weird shenanigans. And the person who had the best offensive game was the guy who, 36 hours earlier, had it leaked that they were going to the transfer portal. Oh my God.
Yeah. Pretty embarrassing, man. It was Jace who really had the great game after it was just leaked that he was transferring. He did not really make an effort to deny that. Man, this game just kind of sucked. Oakley had a pretty solid day, all things considered. He had a really tough drop there at the end of the game, but I think that was a 50-50 shared blame situation with Avery because it wasn't a very good throw, but he should have caught it as well. So Trace Bybee did not register a catch in this game.
Sorry, go ahead.
But he did, which it was too bad to see him not grab a catch in this one, particularly how it seemed like he really finally had a breakout.
Yeah, I will say that Trace Bybee did do a really good job run blocking, and he had a few routes where he was the runoff guy for Jace Brown, which cool. I'm just gonna leave that one there. I don't feel like I should say anything after that. If I speak, big trouble. But this game was just annoying. It was really annoying, and it's been a really, really annoying end of the season. And I feel like everyone is feeling that, and I know that everyone is feeling that because I have access to our listenership numbers. Which, not great. If we were getting ad rev still, I'd be a little upset, but we don't. We're just doing this for vibes at this point. Problem is, the vibes are atrocious.
Yeah, it's not been great, man. I don't really have a lot to say, honestly, about this game. I do think that we all learned a valuable lesson this year, though, and that's about off-season hype. Taking things with a grain of salt, I suppose, is the overarching lesson that we need to learn. But I'm definitely curious to see what this team does on the portal, as well as what bowl game we get. I'm interested to see who sticking around, who's leaving, who we end up having to cut because of scholarship limits. But yeah, it's there's a brutal way to end the regular season. I hope that we can win our bowl game and get some momentum going into next year. Because if we do not win our bowl game, actually will be kind of a disaster end of the year, I think. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. You ready to wrap this episode up?
I'm ready, man.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. And if you want to email us, we're aggievillealleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I am at ACEdward00.
I am at Connor Balthasar, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alleycats merch store found in our podcast and Twitter bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.